My name is Clara Thorne, and for most of my 32 years, I have been a master of the quiet arts, observing, listening, and fading into the wallpaper of my own family's life. That evening, I was practicing this skill from a wicker chair tucked into the corner of my sister Sabrina's meticulously landscaped backyard. The party was in full swing, a symphony of clinking glasses and laughter that felt both familiar and painfully foreign. I nursed a glass of iced water, the condensation a cool, grounding presence against my palm, and watched the performance unfold. Sabrina, as always, was the sun around which every other planet in our small universe was expected to orbit. She was recounting a story from our childhood, a well-worn anecdote about the time I'd forgotten my single line in a third-grade play and stood frozen on stage until the teacher had to lead me away. Her voice was animated, her hands painting a picture of my mortification for her rapt audience. She added embellishments, of course, a dramatic faint, a week of silent shame, details that never happened but made the story so much better. My mother's laughter was the loudest, a bright, tinkling sound that always seemed to endorse Sabrina's narrative. My father, leaning against the polished stone of the outdoor fireplace, chuckled and added, "That's our Clara. Always in her own world." I didn't react. I had learned long ago that my silence was the most fertile ground for their assumptions. It was easier than fighting, easier than trying to explain a truth they had no interest in hearing. Then, a small voice cut through the warm, cloying air, as clear and sharp as a shard of ice. "But she flies the jet." The world seemed to hold its breath. The convivial hum of conversation ceased. A fork clattered softly against a plate. Sabrina, her story arrested mid-sentence, blinked down at her 10-year-old son, Noah. "What was that, sweetheart?" Noah, unperturbed, looked from his mother to the small circle of adults. "Aunt Clara flies the jet. She showed me. She wears the headset and everything." Sabrina's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise, but no sound emerged. My father straightened up, his smirk vanishing. My mother's smile froze, becoming a brittle mask. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I didn't nod, I didn't offer a single word of confirmation. I simply let the silence stretch, letting it fill the space they had always so eagerly occupied. Some truths, I've learned, are most powerful when they arrive unannounced, delivered by the only person in the room who had bothered to look past the story everyone else had already decided was finished. Growing up in the shadow of someone like Sabrina is an education in self-effacement. She was born with a spotlight attached to her, a radiant, golden-haired child whose laughter could charm adults into excusing her sharp-edged remarks and casual cruelties. She had a way of commanding a room, of pulling all the light and energy toward herself, leaving the corners, where I resided, in dim relief. I was the quiet one, the bookish one with hair the color of dusk. If Sabrina was a bonfire, I was the soft, steady glow of a single candle, easily overlooked, easily extinguished by the slightest breeze. Our family accepted this dynamic as the natural order of things. "She just has that sparkle," my father would say, ruffling Sabrina's hair as she recounted some new social triumph. "Don't be so sensitive, Clara," my mother would admonish gently whenever I'd retreat from the force of her personality. "You're different. You're more grounded." Grounded. For years, that word felt like an anchor tied to my feet. It was their polite way of saying I was plain, unexciting, destined for a life lived in the footnotes of Sabrina's grand, sprawling epic. So I leaned into it. I stopped competing. If I got a good grade, she would win a lead role in the school musical. If I taught myself a complex piece on the piano, she would perform an impromptu, wildly applauded dance at a family gathering. Each time, their praise for her was effusive, while my accomplishments were met with a quiet nod. "That's nice, dear," before the conversation inevitably swung back to Sabrina. I learned to build a life for myself in the quiet spaces they never bothered to look. In high school, while Sabrina was being crowned prom queen, I was working weekends at a dusty local airfield, not as a clerk, but as a general hand for a grizzled old mechanic named Gus. I'd sweep hangars, clean engine cowlings, and listen to the stories of the pilots who passed through. Gus paid me in cash and, more importantly, in knowledge. He'd let me sit in the cockpits of the old Pipers and Cessnas, explaining the instruments, the feel of the yoke, the magic of aerodynamics. The scent of avgas and oil became the smell of freedom. I never told my family I was applying to Embry-Riddle. The thought of their reaction, at best, confusion, at worst, condescending laughter, was enough to keep me silent. When the thick acceptance packet arrived, I opened it in my car, parked a block away from our house. I remember pressing the letterhead to my chest, a fierce, secret joy blooming inside me. I had carved out a piece of the sky for myself, a future they hadn't designed, a version of me they had never met. When I moved away for school, they accepted my explanation of a technical program in Arizona without a single follow-up question. At holidays, I'd keep my updates intentionally vague. Things are good. Still working around planes. They would nod, their eyes already scanning the room for Sabrina, who would be holding court with tales of her new engagement, her interior design course, her growing social media presence. I didn't mind. Their inattention was a gift. It gave me the space to become myself. What they never knew, what they never thought to ask, was that while they were laughing about the timid girl who froze on stage, I was logging my first solo cross-country flight across the Sonoran Desert. While they were admiring Sabrina's new kitchen backsplash, I was studying for my instrument rating, learning to navigate through zero-visibility clouds with nothing but a panel of glowing dials to guide me. While they were celebrating her wedding, I was earning my commercial pilot's license, my world expanding with every hour I spent above the earth. The first time I broke through a solid layer of clouds on a solo flight is a memory etched into my soul. One moment, I was surrounded by a disorienting, featureless gray, a world of doubt and instrument scanning. The next, the nose of the plane pierced the veil, and I was thrust into a realm of impossible, blinding sunlight. Below me was a vast, undulating sea of white, and above, a dome of the deepest, most tranquil blue I had ever seen. In that moment, suspended between two worlds, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was utterly alone, yet completely whole. This was mine. This quiet, exhilarating, boundless space was mine. By the time I was 30, I was a first officer for Cirrus Wing Charters, a boutique private aviation company based out of Aspen. We flew Gulfstream G650S for a clientele whose names were synonymous with power and influence: tech billionaires, international diplomats, celebrities seeking anonymity. I've watched the sun rise over the Swiss Alps, seen the lights of Tokyo glitter like a carpet of fallen stars, and navigated thunderstorms over the Caribbean that felt like biblical events. I lived a life of extraordinary moments and profound responsibility. And to my family, I just worked at the airport. The disconnect was, at times, comical. During one Christmas dinner, Sabrina turned to me with a look of patronizing curiosity. "So, Clara, are you like a flight attendant? Or do you do the baggage check-in thing?" I remember smiling and stirring my coffee. "Something like that," I said. Before I could have elaborated, not that I intended to, she had already moved on, launching into a detailed account of the five-star resort she and her husband, David, had visited in Bali. My parents were captivated. When I quietly mentioned I'd be in Geneva the following week for work, my father blinked. "Geneva," he said, his brow furrowed. "Is that the town near Lake Geneva, in Wisconsin? Your grandmother had a cottage there." I didn't correct him. "Something like that, Dad." Their ignorance was no longer a source of pain. It was a shield. By underestimating me so completely, they had given me the ultimate freedom, the freedom to exist without their judgment or their approval. When they looked at me, they saw the quiet, grounded girl they had created. They never saw the woman who held the lives of a dozen people in her hands at 45,000 feet. They never saw the woman who knew the precise language of air traffic control in 3 different countries. They never saw me at all. And I had let it be. My life was compartmentalized. My uniform, a crisp navy blue suit with silver wings pinned above the breast pocket, was always packed away before I came home. My apartment had no framed aviation certificates, no model airplanes on the shelves. My life in the sky was a secret garden, and I was its sole keeper. I wasn't hiding, I was curating. I was protecting that sacred, sunlit space above the clouds from the long, critical shadows of my family. Until Noah. He was the one person they hadn't taught to look down, and so he was the only one who had ever thought to look up. The invitation arrived, as it always did, via a group text from Sabrina one bright Tuesday morning. Family barbecue this Saturday at our place. Son Hamburger David's trying a new smoker recipe. Be there or be square. Winking face, the tone was her signature blend of forced enthusiasm and casual command. It was an invitation that felt more like a summons. For years, my response had been a polite and truthful excuse. Sorry, on call this weekend. Can't, have a trip to London. But this time, something felt different. A quiet curiosity stirred in me. Perhaps I was tired of avoiding it. Perhaps I just wanted to see what would happen if I showed up without an apology. I typed back a simple "I'll be there." Her reply was instantaneous. Great. Could you bring one of your lemon thyme tarts? You know how Dad loves them. I hadn't made that tart in almost a decade, but it was another role she was casting me in. The dutiful daughter, the provider of nostalgic comforts. Sure, I typed back. The Saturday of the party was drenched in the golden, late summer light of the Pacific Northwest. I pulled on a simple cream-colored silk blouse, comfortable linen trousers, and sandals. No uniform, no wings, nothing to signal the other half of my life. I parked my modest sedan a street away, a subconscious habit of not wanting to draw attention. Sabrina's backyard was a page out of a home and garden magazine. String lights crisscrossed over a bluestone patio, perfectly mismatched cushions adorned the teak furniture, and a pristine new play structure for Noah stood in the corner like a piece of modern sculpture. Sabrina, in a flowing floral maxi dress, moved through the crowd of relatives and neighbors with the practiced grace of a seasoned hostess, her laughter the soundtrack to the afternoon. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't quite land. Clara, you made it. The tart looks divine. Just pop it on the table over there. And hey, could you be a dear and give David a hand with the corn on the cob? You're so good at the quiet, helpful stuff. I smiled, a small, genuine curve of my lips. It was almost fascinating to watch the gears of our old dynamic turn so smoothly. Of course, Sabrina. Happy to help. I spent the first hour in a state of detached observation. I listened to my aunt gush about Sabrina's recent feature in a local lifestyle blog. I heard my father boasting to a neighbor about David's latest real estate deal. I was introduced to a new couple as, "This is my sister, Clara. She works with airplanes." The woman smiled politely before Sabrina whisked her away to show her the new herb garden. I was invisible, just as I'd always been. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a slight. It felt like a vantage point. The memory of last Thanksgiving surfaced. Sabrina and David had gone on a pre-holiday getaway to Mexico, and I had volunteered to watch Noah for the long weekend. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just a few days. But instead of taking him to parks and movies, I took him to a place that mattered to me. I had a long layover at my home base in Aspen, and I took him to the private airfield. I walked him through the hushed, cavernous hangar, the air thick with the clean, metallic scent of the jets. I sat him in the left seat of a G650, its cockpit dark and silent. I let him touch the smooth leather of the yoke and look at the bewildering array of switches and screens. He had been silent for a long time, his small face a mask of awe. Then he turned to me, his eyes wide. "You fly this?" he'd whispered, his voice reverent. "I do," I'd said simply. "Like, in the sky? With people in the back?" "Yes." He hadn't asked how much I made or who I flew for. He had just looked from the complex instrument panel to my face and back again, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. He saw the confidence, the responsibility, the quiet magic of it. He saw me. Now, at the party, he was sitting on the grass near my chair, meticulously building a tower out of Lego blocks, occasionally glancing up at me with a small, conspiratorial smile. He was the only one who knew my secret. As the sun began to dip below the tall fir trees bordering the yard, the party reached its second act. The wine flowed more freely, the laughter grew louder, and Sabrina, sensing her moment, settled onto the arm of the outdoor sofa, preparing to hold court. I recognized the glint in her eye. It was time for the evening's entertainment, and as usual, I was the main feature. "Oh my God, you guys," she began, her voice carrying across the patio. "I was just thinking about the time Clara was in the middle school play. Remember that, Mom? A Midsummer Night's Dream?" My mother chuckled in anticipation. "I remember. She was one of the fairies." "Yes," Sabrina exclaimed, gesturing dramatically. "And she had one line. One, 'The Queen of Fairies at our sport shall be.' And she practiced it for weeks. Walked around the house muttering it under her breath. And then, night of the show, she gets on stage, the spotlight hits her, and nothing. Just dead air. She completely froze." A ripple of polite, sympathetic laughter went through the group. My uncle shook his head with a grin. "Oh, Clara, you were always so shy." "Shy doesn't even cover it," Sabrina continued, warming to her theme. "She just stood there like a deer in headlights until Mrs. Davison literally had to walk on stage and lead her off by the hand. It was the most tragically hilarious thing I've ever seen. That's my sister for you, always a bit lost in the clouds." I didn't look up. I swirled the ice in my glass, listening to the story of a girl I barely remembered, a caricature they had kept alive for their own amusement. I felt a familiar stillness settle over me, the old instinct to shrink, to disappear. But this time, something else was there too, a quiet strength, a bedrock of self-knowledge that they couldn't touch. Noah had stopped building his tower. He was on his feet now, his small brow furrowed in a way that was so serious, so adult. He walked over to his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice not loud, but carrying with an undeniable weight. Sabrina, interrupted, looked down, her smile faltering slightly. "What is it, sweetie?" "Mom's telling a story." He looked at her, then glanced at me, and then back at her. "Why are you making fun of Aunt Clara?" The question was so simple, so direct, it hung in the air like a hummingbird. Sabrina was visibly flustered. "Honey, I'm not making fun of her. It's just a funny family story. We're just teasing." But Noah's gaze was unwavering. He shook his head, a small, firm gesture. "She's not lost in the clouds," he said, his voice gaining confidence. "She flies the jet." Silence. It wasn't a comfortable lull in conversation. It was an absolute void. It was the sound of a record scratching to a halt, of a carefully constructed facade instantly crumbling to dust. The air, once filled with easy laughter, was now thick with a palpable, stunned quiet. My uncle's grin vanished. My aunt, who had been reaching for a canopy, froze with her hand in midair. Sabrina stared at her son as if he'd just started speaking in a foreign language. A cousin finally broke the spell, letting out an uncertain laugh. "The jet? What jet is that, Noah?" Noah turned to him, his expression one of pure, unadulterated fact. "Her Gulfstream. She took me to see it. It has leather seats and a cockpit with a million buttons. She said she flies it all over the world. She's a pilot." He said the word pilot as if it were a royal title. Every eye in the yard swung to me. It was a sudden, intense focus I hadn't felt from them in my entire life. They were all looking at me, really looking, as if for the first time. They saw not the quiet girl from the stories, but a woman sitting calmly in a wicker chair, meeting their gazes without flinching. My mother found her voice first, a strained, thin sound. "Clara, honey, is that true? You're flying, Those kinds of planes. I allowed a small, gentle smile. For about 6 years now, Mom. My father cleared his throat, attempting to regain his footing with a weak joke. Well, I'll be. Guess you've been holding out on us. No, I replied, my voice even and soft, yet carrying across the silent patio. You just never asked the right questions. The truth of it, so plainly stated, landed with the force of a physical blow. There was no anger in my voice, only a quiet statement of fact that left no room for argument. They had never asked. Not once. Aunt Helen, ever the peacemaker, rushed to fill the void. Well, my goodness. A pilot. That's incredible, Clara. Truly. We're all so proud. The words felt hollow, a hasty attempt to patch a hole that had been torn in the fabric of their reality. They weren't proud. They were embarrassed. They were reeling from the sudden, undeniable proof of their own neglect. And Sabrina. I finally looked directly at my sister. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, confusion, and something deeper, something that looked like the ground giving way beneath her feet. The star of the show had been upstaged, not by a rival, but by a truth she had willingly ignored for 2 decades. Her power, derived from her narrative of our lives, had evaporated in a single sentence from her own son. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper. Why didn't you ever tell us? I held her gaze. I could have listed 1,000 reasons, the years of being talked over, the subtle dismissals, a casual cruelty disguised as teasing. But I settled on the simplest, most honest answer. You never made a space for me to, I said. You were always too busy telling my story to ever let me speak for myself. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't stunned anymore. It was heavy, reflective, filled with the ghosts of 1,000 missed opportunities. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blouse. The party felt like it was happening on a different planet. My role here was finished. Noah came to my side, slipping his small hand into mine. His touch was an anchor in the sudden, turbulent sea of emotion. Are you leaving? He asked quietly, his eyes searching my face. I think it's time, I said. His small shoulders slumped. Will I see you again soon? I knelt down so we were at eye level, so the moment was just ours. There's a whole universe of constellations I still have to teach you about, I murmured, for his ears only. And we haven't even gotten to the principles of thrust and lift. A brilliant, relieved smile broke across his face. Okay, I echoed, ruffling his hair. I squeezed his hand once more before letting go. I turned and walked toward the gate, my footsteps the only sound in the unnaturally still backyard. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I was leaving a family gathering not feeling smaller, but feeling exactly my own size. I hadn't needed to raise my voice or start a fight. The truth, in the end, had been quiet. And it had been more than enough. No one called out for me to stop. They just watched me go, a silent audience, finally seeing the person who had been there all along, now walking off a stage she had never asked to be on. The next morning, I was back where I belonged, in the hushed, focused quiet of the cockpit. We were at 41,000 feet, slicing through the thin, cold air over the vast, empty plains of Wyoming. Below, the world was a patchwork of brown and green. Above, the sky was an endless, forgiving blue. Up here, the past felt distant, the small dramas of the earth smoothed over by altitude and perspective. I thought of the look on Sabrina's face, the bewilderment, the dawning realization that the person she thought she knew was a stranger. I didn't feel a sense of triumph, no satisfying sting of revenge. What I felt was a quiet, sorrowful kind of peace. It was the peace of a long-held breath finally being released. I don't expect a phone call. I don't anticipate a heartfelt apology. The patterns of a lifetime are not so easily broken. But something has irrevocably shifted. The foundation of their family narrative has cracked, and they can't unsee the fissure. They can no longer tell the story of the lost, timid little sister without the footnote that she flies a $70 million jet across continents. The real gift of that evening wasn't their shock, it was Noah. He didn't reveal my secret to defend me or to challenge his mother. He said it because, to him, it was just a fact, as simple and true as the sky being blue. In his clear, unprejudiced eyes, my life wasn't a footnote, it was a headline. He saw me not in relation to my sister, but as a person in my own right, with a life as vast and compelling as the sky I traveled. My journey wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. It was about building a life so full, so resonant with purpose, that their opinion of it became irrelevant. The silence they had imposed on me had become my sanctuary, the space where I learned to listen to my own voice. And the sky they thought I was lost in was actually the place where I had found myself. The co-pilot's voice crackled softly in my headset, calling out a course correction from air traffic control. I responded with calm, practiced precision, my hands steady on the controls. I am Clara Thorne, and I don't need anyone's permission to fly. The runway is clear. The horizon is waiting. And the silence up here is not empty. It's full of everything that matters.